Tony Torn with New York Natives. This is the New York Theater Series. Here we're at the Public Theater, one of the coolest theater institutions in New York. We're going to go upstairs and talk to Oskar Eustis, who runs the place, and tell you a little bit about the history and about his personal history here in New York. Introduce the idea of what the public is, you know, as we are now here in New York.
Well, the public really has its roots as the New York Shakespeare Festival, and for the first 15 years of existence, all it did was free Shakespeare in the parks, and it still does it up at the Delacorte in Central Park, right off of 81st and Central Park West. We give away 1,500 to 2,000 free tickets every day to the people of New York all summer to see not just Shakespeare, mostly Shakespeare, but also Shakespeare and others performed by the greatest actors in the American landscape.
So this space used to be the, what was it, the Astor Library?
Yeah.
What was some of the history of this building? It's an amazing space.
Fantastic space. This started as the Astor Library in the 1840s, and it was the first free lending library in the city of New York. It was the basis, many years later it merged with the Morgan Library and became the New York Public Library. So this was actually the start of the New York Public Library. The building, it went through a few different incarnations. It was actually an armory for a while during the First World War. But then in 1921, it was taken over by HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And from 1921 to 1965, tens of thousands of Jewish refugees from around the world came to this building as their entry point in the United States. This was Ellis Island for Jewish refugees.
And how was he able to get this building? And I know there was some sort of struggles in trying to sort of like get what he needed out of this space from the city.
Well, when he first saw the space, he fell in love with it and wanted to get it. He had started looking for an indoor space. And he discovered it was slated to be torn down. It had been bought by a developer. It was going to be torn down, and some terrible mid-60s office architecture was going to be put up. And the reason that didn't happen is this was the first building in New York that was designated as a landmark building. This was the start of the landmarking of the New York buildings. So once the building had been landmarked, the developer couldn't tear it down anymore. So suddenly he had a deep interest in selling at a reasonable price.
Right.
Joe did one of the first of those deals with the city, where he sold the building to the city, which paid off the mortgage, and signed a lease where we rented back for $1 a year. So it became the first of the cultural buildings, and now there's a whole cultural institutions group, the CIG, that are various cultural institutions that are in buildings owned by New York City.
Oh, wow. How did you first begin to become aware that you might be working here with the public, and how did that all come about?
Tony, this is going to sound sappy, but this is the building that I walked into when I was 15 years old. I'd run away from home. I was living in an illegal squat on Great Jones Street, and I followed mob of minds into this building. And for the next 5 years, I was around New York, in and out of the public, in and out of the Delacorte. And by the time I left New York, this institution, everything it stood for, it sort of imprinted me like a baby duck on what a theater should be. So essentially, the next 25 years of my career were going and trying to refound the public theater in San Francisco at the Eureka, or remold the Taper into being more like the public in Los Angeles, or go to Trinity Rep and turn that into being more like the public in Rhode Island. And finally, I was lucky enough to get offered this job, and it just was like, score, I'm home!
This is awesome. What's happening now? I know you've got some, isn't there some sort of traveling sort of troupe situation?
So in order to actually go back to that original mission of getting the theater to the people, we've had to come up with some new ways and some old ways. The old ways is we've revived the mobile unit, which is how the Shakespeare Festival used to go. So we are touring now mobile versions of Shakespeare. This incarnation is going primarily to incarcerated populations, in prisons, in homeless shelters, in battered women's shelters, and that has been so fantastically fulfilling that we're never going to let that die again. I am sure that we are going to continue to be involved in trying to get the theater out into the communities, to people who don't think the culture belongs to them, and to find a way to try and make that culture belong to them, whether that's increasing our touring, whether that's increasing the public works program. All of those things I think are going to remain very, very important to us.
Oskar, thanks so much for having us, and and it's so exciting. The public is going to stay public for the public.
That's the idea. Fight for the people, by the people.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Tony.
See you
Fun.
soon.
Fun.